You see, in those days, before, were constructed by the Dutch just to strengthen the walls of the castle. So these were buttresses. 1948, the English were using the castle as a police training school. And to keep the men in shape, they added the pipes on them. And they were climbing up and down for training or exercise. Yeah. This was a church for the Portuguese. It was called St. George's Catholic Church. When the Dutch took over, they were not Catholics. And they were not interested in worshiping in a Catholic church. So they divided this into two. They used the top as a soldier's mess, where they were eating and drinking. And the down, the hall of trade, where the Africans were auctioned or were sold. That isn't to say the Dutch were not Christians, they were. But they preferred having their church on top of one of the females' dungeons to use in the Portuguese church here. And when the English took over, they converted the halls made by the Dutch to classrooms for the police. And that was when the castle was being used as a police training school. And today, as you could see, it's a museum. Okay. With the exception of these two cells, all other rooms here were dungeons for men. 600 men were on this side at the time. On top all round were residences for soldiers, traders, and pastors. On top of them, we had the deputy governor and then the governor. So then the important you are, the higher up you live. Yeah. When the ships came, the men were taken from these dungeons to this. Let's come this way. Over here also, some of them were branded. You know branding. They put the metal stamps in fire when hot. Whichever part of the body they wanted, they had it stamped. And because they were weak, some died from the shock or the pain of it. The hole here and the next one up here were for light and air. As we continue, you need to watch your head and take a step down. Okay. Watch your head and take a step down. You got it. Return. And it was here, I said, instances families could see themselves, they could not talk to each other. At this point also, you should understand they were not walking as freely as we are walking today. Back then, they had been put back in chains. One was chained to the other, in the line of 5, 10, sometimes 15. So you cannot go faster than the chains will let you go. So then slowly, they got to the room of no return. The entrance there is very short, so you are compelled to bend down. And when you bend down also, don't be quick to raise your head. Take about 5 steps before you raise your head. We have a very thick wall over there, and if you don't count 5, the possibility is you may hit your head. And after warning you, I will not be responsible if you do. Okay, now we go. Now we go. Count at least 5. Go. Life never got better. It only got worse. So first it was very difficult being with a family, maybe eating together, sleeping together, whatever they will be doing. The next minute you know you are in chains and made to walk all the distances to the castle. That was sad. But then this will not be compared to staying in the dungeons a month or 2 in your own feces and urine and all that. And whatever happened here also was seen to be far better compared to the ships. It was far brutal on the ships than the dungeons. Yes, it is true they were brought up on decks for them to eat and exercise sometimes, but put at their holding place, they talk of spaces being 20, 25 inches high, human beings made to lie side by side, unable to move and unable to sit up, hands and legs in chains or in shackles, some defecating, vomiting all over themselves. And instances, one could not get his own hand to clean his own mouth. Many died because of the way they were closely packed. Women were sexually abused, sometimes until death. And it was just normal for you to wake up to see the person beside you dead. That was just normal. You go through the records of those who were there. And you know this man called John Newton. John Newton is the one accredited with the song Amazing Grace. And he was one time a slave ship captain. And in his write-ups, he said, he was describing the interior of a ship and he said, The slaves were chained two and two together. They were laid in two rows, one above the other on each side of the ship. They were close to each other like books on a shelf. And he said, I have known them so close that the books on the shelf could not easily contain one more. And I know a white man sent down to arrange them in these rows to the greatest advantage, so that as little space as possible be lost. And every morning, more instances than one are seen of the living and the dead chained together. One man whose account actually made me sad was Richard Drake. Richard Drake, to the story, was an Irish American. And in his experience, he said, on the 8th day out at sea, I went round the half deck, holding a camphor bag in the teeth, for the stench was hideous. I saw the sick and the dying chained together. I saw pregnant women giving birth to babies, whilst chained to corpses, because the drunken overseers had not gone in to remove them. Africans were literally jammed in between decks as if in a coffin. And in a coffin in that dreadful hold became to nearly 1/2 of our cargo before we reached Bahia in Brazil. And this and several others will help you see how horrendous it was going across the waters. And to be taken to the final destinations where they were then enslaved, nothing compares to that. So progressively, it was worse, yeah. When they were into gold and ivory and others, the gate to the boat was from this point to this end. However, when this wicked evil trade started, then they narrowed the exit to what you could see for no one to escape, one person at a time. The narrow nature of the exit should not deceive us into thinking that they never brought fat people. They brought big, big people. However, walking down all the distances, staying in the dungeons a month or two, by the time you get here, they were thin. The water at the time was touching the castle. Now it has receded. And experts are saying it is just because of the movement of the earth. So that is natural. Meaning that right after the exit, we had stairs where they descended in chains to the small boats. And the small boats then carried them to the ships, distances away. And through this and several others of this nature in Africa, explains why today Africans as we are scattered all over the world. Today you have the chance to try to fit into the exit. But a word of caution, don't go beyond it because you don't have the steps there now. Okay? Sorry. Now you look all down there, we have natural sedimentary rocks. And these are said to be over 100 meters deep down. And it's upon such the castle was built. And that explains why for so long a time it is still standing and very, very solid. And every space you see here, before had a cannon in it, so all these had cannons to defend the castle from external attacks. And up here are watchtowers built by the Dutch. Soldiers were put up there to look through if enemies were coming. Now when the English took over, they converted the watchtowers to prisons. And this was where one of the kings of the Asantes, his name was Nana Akwesi Agyeman Prempeh I, was kept. He became king of the Asantes in 1888 at the age of 16. Just 8 years on the throne, he was captured by the British. He was held in there for 4 years. He was taken from here to Freetown in Sierra Leone for 1 year. And then from Sierra Leone to Seychelles Island, Seychelles. He was there in exile for 23 years. But then in 1900 also, there was a British governor called Sir Frederick Hodgson. This man Hudson wanted nothing but the golden stool of the Asantes. And if you care to know, the stool was not handmade. It was conjured from the skies by one local priest called Okonfa-Noche. And the stool was said to be the spirit that unites the Asantes, or the soul of the Asantes. So it was a prestige the king himself would not be given to be sitting on it, let alone Hudson, a foreigner. But to satisfy him, they made a fake golden stool for him. The man took it very excited. Later got to know that was not the original one and wanted to go back. At the time, the king Prempeh had already been captured. Most of the strong leaders had been captured. The men left were scared. They nearly betrayed themselves. And that brought up a queen mother called Ya Asantua, who said no. So this woman, in short, moved from house to house, explained to the people the importance of fighting for the stool. She gathered a whole lot, especially women, and they fought for it. At the end, she was captured, brought in here, and finally exiled to Seychelles Island. Unfortunately, she died over there. In the year 2000, during the 100-year anniversary, her remains were brought back and reburied in her hometown. And one thing we should know, the reason for the war was achieved, because after all, the British could not take the original golden stool away. And one unique thing about the woman in the story was the fact that she started the war at the age of 60. When all the men were running, she went forward. And that in itself is a remarkable achievement. And I am told all African women are as strong as a queen mother. Is that so? It also served as a sundial or clock, where they place a pole at the center and they use a shadow to tell the time of the day. Before 1873, all you could call Elmina was just opposite the castle. The entire Elmina township was just here. In that year, the British destroyed the old township, and that was when the locals, for the first time, refused to hand over their arms upon order. And when it was destroyed, it shifted from here to that side, and there is known as Elmina New Town. So opposite the old town and there the new town. Now it's also for tourists. We come over this way. All these are original Dutch cannons. All these are original Dutch cannons. What is that? Ironically, just underneath or below the church, we have the females' dungeons, just below. Yeah. If you want to check from the Bible, just go to Psalm 132, verse 13 to 14. We'll give you that. We come over this way. Yeah, the governor will be up here picking the ladies. And the one chosen will be made to come up this. And then from here, she'll move further to the governor's place. All right. And the system of the trade was the barter system, so they were exchanging goods for goods. And when they were coming, they brought guns, gunpowder, spirituous liquors, trinkets, among others. And they exchanged these for gold, ivory, later on the other spices. Now, one major thing the Portuguese wanted at the time was gold. And they talk about the fact that the rate at which the locals were giving out the gold gave them the impression that the town could be in abundance of it. So they called this place Amina or Damina, meaning the mine in their language. It was this word that could not be pronounced properly, so it was corrupted to today's word Elmina, and it became the name of the town. 11 years after they had first come in 1482, the Portuguese, led by their captain called Diego de Azambuja, came to see the chief of the town called Nana Kwamina Ansa. They negotiated for this plot of land and they had a castle built. Basically with two main reasons. One, to trade, and two, to give out rooms for the missionaries who were to come in to spread Christianity. And when they came initially, they were Catholics. Before, all these rooms on the ground floor were being used as storerooms or warehouses. But then from the early 16th centuries, it shifted from gold and others to human trade. And when that got started, The rooms that were storerooms before became dungeons where the Africans were kept. At the peak of the trade, the castle is talking of a minimum of 1,000 people at the time, 600 men, 400 women, and the women were occupying the side of the castle. 1637, the locals were fed up with the Portuguese. Looking for saviors, they saw the saviors in the Dutch. They held them through an inland route to the hills and Jago. From there, they attacked the Portuguese for the last time, defeated them, and took over. Sadly, when the Dutch took over, they were not as good as the locals thought they were, so they rather extended the castle and took in more slaves. 1807, English came out to stop it. 1814, the Dutch stopped it. Those who were here doing the actual thing never stopped. So from that time, we came to have what they called illegal period. The profit they were making at the latter part of it could then not match the cost of maintaining the structure. So as this was no more being profitable, on the 6th of April 1872, the Dutch and the English finally exchanged or swapped forts. So the Dutch gave theirs over here to the English, and they took that of the English in northern Sumatra in Indonesia. When the British came, the castle was used as a sub-administrative center. That isn't to say they never took part in the trade, they did. But at the time, they were using the Cape Coast Castle for theirs. During the World War II, they brought men from all English-speaking West Africa, except Liberia, to this place. They trained them here, took them to India and Burma, where they fought for them. And we call them Royal West African Frontier Force. After the Second World War, the castle was then used as a police training school in 1948. So we had the English in control until 1957, when we became Ghana, and we took over from them. So as it stands, the castle is 526 years, 526. The Portuguese were here for the first 155 years. The Dutch were here for 235 years. English were here for 85 years. And Ghana, being the last group, have also been here for the last, 51 years, and we're still counting, basically, yeah. We should also briefly understand that when the Europeans came initially to trade, most of them never brought their wives. And as they got in also, they could not stay without them. So governors, soldiers, traders kept on raping the women in the dungeons. Whenever the governor wanted, stood up on the balcony, ordered the women out, and picked. This woman chosen could have stayed in the dungeons for a whole month, never cleaned her teeth, never took a bath or bathe, gone through the menses sometimes, and still the governor wanted. So the soldiers fetched water from here, washed her at the center of the courtyard. Women from the dungeons looked on. After the humiliation, she was dressed up, given something to eat, and up on the stairs, through the door I showed you up there, we call the trap door, she was taken to the governor. After, she was brought back to the dungeons. Some very few became mistresses and they stayed longer. And those who became pregnant were subsequently freed or liberated. You need to understand that they came not only from Ghana, some came from Togo, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, even Nigeria. So when the woman was freed, she could not go back to where she came from. Secondly, the Europeans also never wanted their own babies to go wayward or astray. So some houses were built here in town where those found pregnant were kept. When the Dutch came, some of their traders decided not to be raping the women, but went out there to the village, legally sort of married the women, had individual houses built, we call them stone houses, where they stayed with their so-called wives. Later on, the kids were brought back to the castle and they were educated. But sadly, most of these ones also became traders, and they were used like a bridge between the Africans and the Europeans. And also they gave out names to their kids, and that was the beginning of the European names all along the coast in those days. Below this place is a water tank. The Portuguese had this built. When the Dutch came, they would not trust the Portuguese, so they stopped using this and had a bigger one built in the main courtyard. But then...
That's for water?
For water. When the Dutch came, they would not trust the Portuguese, so they stopped using this and had a bigger one built in the main courtyard. But when the same Dutch guy who was thinking this could be poisoned picked the woman to be used, then the water to him poisoned was then good enough to clean the woman. Now we're not using this, but it's been proven water in there was not poisoned. There is a cannonball, and 8 of such were here at the time. Each one had chains on it, and they were used to punish the women who were very difficult to handle.
What kind of ball is that?
Cannonball. Cannon.
Is it metal?
Metal, yeah.
What would they do with it? They would throw it at her?
There were chains on it, and they were fitted to the legs. They were made to stand in the sun or the rain as long as they pleased, no food as punishment. And the idea was to put fear into them, so that any time any soldier would come, he could easily have one to be used. So we understand the soldiers, the traders, the governors all using the women partly explains why we have the light color skins all along the coast in those days. Today you can confidently say the light color skins are gradually fading away. However, we have rare instances where a dark-skinned guy meets even a darker-skinned lady, and all of a sudden, they get a lighter kind of skin baby. And before, the question will always get to the woman, where did you get this one from? Now it is changing because they are beginning to understand what happened in the past and what will happen today from it. See the dungeon here? And here you talk of 100 to 150 people at a time. And on the floor, as hard as you see, they were packed or were sleeping. They were given food and water once, twice in a day, a very little just to keep them alive. A month or two, they were held in here, mostly allowed out, when the governor was going to pick one to be used. Over here also, they were not allowed to wash down the women. Some of them had to go through the menses and sleep in it. The hole over there, among others, was for ventilation. Unfortunately, it was connected to a place they called magazine, where they kept ammunition or explosives. So whenever there was any leakage, the fumes came out and worsened a already bad situation. Here, 2 containers or receptacles were provided. One was placed at the various ends where they were expected to go to ease themselves or go to the toilet into them. But they talk about the fact that during the 2nd month, they themselves became that weak, such that they could not move from where they were to where the containers were to do it into them. So practically, they had everything on the floor and they were sleeping in it. And these, among others, explains why they were dying. And those that died in here were thrown into the sea. Before, we had a gate over here, so you could not go out unless you have been asked to do so. These bars were put there not long ago just to avoid accidents. Before, we had stairs where they descended. But now, because we are not using the water tank, we've made a drainage over here, so that when it rains, water would collect in and then go away. So we haven't got the steps here as at this time. In those days also, husbands and wives could be captured. During wars, the entire family could be captured. And brought in here, they were separated. Women were up here, men were down there. All the time in the dungeons, they never saw each other. Most never saw each other again, and that was the end of it. For some few, the story says, when the ships came and they were going, coincidentally, some could see themselves there, but even there, they could not talk to each other. So they kept on crying and crying as they continued. Know also that a child below 10 years in most cases was put together with an adult and sold together as a person. And all those above 10 were sold as individuals. Over here, they never had a separate place where kids were kept. So it is accepted boys were put together with men, girls were put together with the women. And imagine a girl below 10 years in that filth. Most of them died in the dungeons before the ships even came.
Just be like the Batman. All the openings of the bag. All the openings.
It tastes like chicken.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. Say all meat, it all tastes like chicken when you take it and fry it and season it.
They've been here since, but now, while we have not taken them off, they feed the mosquitoes also. So at least you don't need repellents when you come in. At least you don't need them. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's the end of the tour. Good, good, good.